This is the Hasselblad 907x CFV, a legendary film camera that is probably my favorite camera of all time. And this is the brand new Hasselblad 907x with the CFV 100C back. It's a 100 megapixel back that obviously works with this incredibly small, compact, lightweight camera that more than borrows from the design cues of my favorite camera of all time, but also is able to be modular and work with that same camera to kind of breathe new life into it, if you will. So today we're gonna go over this camera, all of the new features, what it offers, and why you would want to buy a camera that looks like this in the year 2024, and specifically what makes this so unique and special from a actual user perspective. Now I wanna say a huge thank you to Hasselblad for sending this camera over for the sake of this review. I do actually get to keep this camera, which is incredible. So as a dream camera of mine, if you've watched some of my older 907x videos with the original 50 megapixel back, you know how much I love this camera. So when I was offered the chance to be able to make a little bit of content around this camera and be able to keep it, obviously I was going to jump at that opportunity, but obviously wanted to make sure that that was upfront so you know the context of my opinions and all that kind of stuff. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, while this is a beautiful little piece of tech that is something that is an object of desire that I actually want to pick up and use, but you're getting a ton of functionality that is just top of the line sensor technology. It has face detect autofocus. And while I'm gonna be honest, this is not going to be a like tracking continuous kind of camera. I'm not gonna shoot sports with this. It's been super accurate for slow walking things, for portraits. So basically anything that I would be normally photographing and comfortable photographing on my 500cm is something I can easily do on the 907x. So I love that I kind of have the built-in understanding of what is capable here, and especially for a 100 megapixel sensor, knowing that I have face detect autofocus and those phase detect autofocus points to give me quick and accurate autofocus is definitely useful on this system. Now, again, it's a 100 megapixel backside illuminated sensor. It has 16-bit color with the Hasselblad color science. It's just very accurate. The color depth is amazing. And in the files that I've looked at so far, it's just incredible. You can definitely tell the difference between a medium format file like this. It has a base ISO of 64, which is super clean and beautiful. And maybe my favorite thing about this, especially for what I'm going to be using this for, is that 15 stops of dynamic range. One of the easiest ways to tell the difference between digital and film, in my opinion, is the lack of dynamic range in many cameras. And the fact that this has 15 stops of dynamic range is just absolutely fantastic and will allow me to get much cleaner and more gradual images out of something like this than a lot of other cameras I've worked with. One of the other modern conveniences that is incredible out of this camera is that it also has a 1 terabyte SSD in here. Currently, I actually don't even own any CF Express Type B cards, which is the secondary card slot kind of thing here outside of the 1 terabyte SSD. But obviously I've been able to photograph with this no problem because 1 terabyte is still gonna last me a long time, despite the fact that these files are enormous. So the fact that they've included a full terabyte into this camera is a very, very welcome improvement here. It also has a USB port, which allows for charging and offloading to the computer. It's super fast, and I was able to move files very, very quickly off this camera. And then finally, the interface on these Hasselblad cameras is just beautiful. It's simplistic. It is just one of the absolute best menu systems out there. It's very simple, icon based. There's just not a lot of stuff to futz around with. Everything's very clear, easy to get to. And it's just another one of those things where when you look at the screen, it's a beautiful experience. It adds to the whole ethos of this camera. Now, you can see that from a design standpoint, these two cameras obviously are, again, more than borrowing from each other here. This is absolutely a modern counterpart to this classic look. I think that the 500cm is one of the most beautiful cameras ever. I love the design, the sleek body with the black, and then my version is the one with the silver. And then obviously they have taken that same approach to this camera where they have all of the same kind of leatherette with the silver outlines. Then the best part about this whole thing is the user experience for a digital camera, at least, is about as close as you can get to the original. So with the original here, we have a shutter button on the front and a lens button on the other side. Same thing with the 907X. You have a shutter button on the front with a lens button here. You also have this little wheel here on the front where you're able to change your aperture. And then there's this tiny little side button here where you can press that down to make it into some sort of like auxiliary mode, allowing you to change your shutter speed instead. So from a functional standpoint, obviously they're very similar. I love the waist level viewfinder on my 500cm. I use that almost exclusively. And the reason why is it takes the photographic experience from being up at my eye level and obviously moves it lower. I'm someone that is over 6 feet tall, and so having a different perspective literally forced upon me from this camera is something that I really love, and it forces a lot of creativity out of me. And as you can see here on the 907X, we have this really, really nice screen that comes down. And if you put it right there like that, you can see that you're getting a very, very similar experience to the original 500cm here. So as someone that, again, just loves this camera to death, having a way to do that in the digital world obviously is really, really helpful. Now, another thing about this obviously is just that it's so small. The 500cm already is a really small camera. It's one of the things I really like about it. Being able to carry this around on like a wedding day, a full day of shooting, or if I'm out traveling at a national park or something like that, I can easily carry this thing around. And the same goes for this thing. Like, this is incredibly small, and if we're really getting into it, this is the back, and this tiny little thing is actually the camera. So obviously you need the back to make it work, but it's pretty impressive how small and compact this whole setup is. So as far as something that you can just carry around no problem, obviously, I think this is probably the smallest medium format digital camera out there on the market. Now, as you saw, I removed the back here. So just like the film days, you have a digital back, and that is kind of the cornerstone of this whole system. And it's honestly, the upgrade from the original 907X is just this back right here. And so one of the beautiful things about the 500cm system and the whole V series of cameras that they put out, a long time ago, was that modularity. Photographers loved the ability to remove the lenses, to change out the viewfinders. So I have like a regular kind of mirrored viewfinder here that I can swap out for this waist level one. And then as a wedding photographer, I've always found the multiple different backs to be super helpful. So I could put maybe a faster speed film, a black and white film, and have multiple backs where I can just swap things in and out. But as you can probably guess, if you didn't already know this about this system, I can now take this digital back and put it on my 500cm, and I can get that same kind of analog experience out of this camera using my vintage glass here. And while it's not going to be the same size as the original 6x6 negatives, and if you want to see the size difference, there it is. So it definitely has a bit of a crop factor from the full 6x6, but that full user experience is then available to be used on this digital back right here. I love that this actually kind of syncs up to the body as well and still uses the leaf shutter from this lens. I still rotate the thing to advance and reset the mirror. So if you are someone that already does have a camera like this and you love that analog experience, the cool thing is obviously you can bring in that whole set of lenses and use them on that same body, that same form factor, all that kind of stuff into a kind of new series like this. But then if you would like to pull it back and bring it back into the modern era, you can put it on this camera, use all of the XCD lenses and the new phase detect autofocus, as well as the newer firmware updates allowing for face detect autofocus, and you get all of the modern conveniences of a regular digital camera as well. Now, to go along with that modularity, Hasselblad also has this control grip here that goes on to the body. And so the nice thing is if you are in a situation where you do want more of a typical modern functionality where you have a joystick, more buttons all at the ready here instead of kind of relying on the screen, you definitely have the option to use this grip. It helps a lot with larger lenses. And again, you just get a lot more functionality with the scroll wheels here on the front and the back. You have the shutter button up here. And then you just have all the functionality that you would on a more DSLR style of a mirrorless camera, like something like the X2D. Now, I will say this is an optional accessory. It doesn't come with the 907X, but it definitely is a really, really cool option and something that I would definitely suggest at least considering if you're thinking about getting into this system. Another thing they include is this hot shoe here. So I believe what you do is you remove this and then it goes right into that point. And then obviously this just gives you a direct connection into the camera body, allowing you to use flash and things like that. So if you are someone that wants to use flash on this, it makes it really easy to do so with just this little attachment. And then finally, one thing that was really important to me on this is the availability to adapt other lenses. So obviously you can use all of the XCD lenses. You're not limited to their newer series here, but you can also use all of the older H series lenses and the HC lenses, HCD lenses, as well as the X-Pan lenses. They make adapters for all of those. And then like I have adapters for other vintage lenses that I love to use on this, as well as new kind of like third-party lenses. And the thing that is really helpful on this camera, especially for me versus the original 907X, is that on the 14-bit mode, this sensor reads out, I think, about twice as fast as the 16-bit mode. So if you're going to adapt lenses and use the electronic shutter, you're not going to run into nearly as many of the kind of like rolling shutter warping issues that you would before. Because with this whole setup, all of the shutters are leaf shutters that are in the lenses, which is an amazing thing, especially if you are working with flash. But if you're using lenses that don't have leaf shutters, obviously you're reliant on how fast the sensor itself can read out that information. And I found that the 14-bit mode here reads out definitely fast enough to use adapted lenses, which was something that I was still doing with the original, but it's something that is much improved on this camera and makes this system a lot more flexible to me at least. So overall, obviously I'm super excited about this thing, and I have a few more videos coming up about it where I'm going to take it out and do some field testing, show you a lot more image samples, things like that. I also have the 55V coming in, as that is probably the lens that I personally would buy first in this system. So I'll share a lot of images from that, as well as this 28P lens that obviously is incredibly small and fits with this whole system really, really well. So if you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Thanks again to Hasselblad for sending this over. And if you're interested in seeing my original video on the 907x 50C, you can check that out up here. And then you can check out my original video of the 500CM, or if you are here after I've already published more videos on this, you can check them out up here, and I will see you in one of those videos.